Good afternoon, everybody. I am pleased and honored to be able to have a conversation with Dr. John Sampen, um, professor of saxophone at Bowling Green State University since 1977, um, and really has contributed so much to our field. And in particular, most of you know he's been so active in commissioning and building our repertoire, and so that's what we are going to surround this conversation with today. And please help me welcome Dr. John Sampen.
Thank you very much. Uh, it's such a pleasure to join this talk today. Nate, just want to say what a great job you have done and are doing in providing these seminars, which I think are very valuable, and you're covering some terrific information. So it's just my honor to be part of it. Um, Nate had asked me to just say a couple words about my background. Of course, I was a student of Fred Hemke and spent quite a few years and a lot of money at Northwestern. Uh, I finished my bachelor's in 1971 and my master's in 72, and then we came back and did the doctorate, which was finally done in 1984. So I spent a lot of years working with Fred, and he became such a great mentor and friend for me and for many of us. So I'm honored to have that experience. Bowling Green, I'd never heard of Bowling Green when I was hired, and I am so privileged to have made that my main place of employment for all these years. 43 years we were just figuring. So it's been a great place for saxophone and for new music. It's really, I think, a very special university, and I'm honored to be part of that school as well.
Great. So, as we mentioned, we're going to talk about the commissioning process today. And, I guess the first question is really, how would you, I know a lot of people have different ideas of what commissioning means. And of course, there's a difference between commissioning a piece and a piece being dedicated to you. Um, you know, can you talk about your definition of commissioning?
Absolutely. I I'm going to start with a little story. In 1988, I, for whatever reason, was struck by the wonderful pieces that Sigurd Roscher uh, had inspired by many great composers. In fact, still many composers who we all play still today. So that was just a special moment that I thought I'd like to thank him for commissioning all those great works. And so I wrote him a letter, especially complimenting the Ibert Concertino and the Martin Ballade, which I was working on at that time. And Sigurd wrote me back a message. I still have that letter, and he said that the Ibert and Martin were indeed composed for him, but as I have said again and again, neither were commissioned by me. In fact, I have never commissioned any composition. And then he went on at some point to say he's never paid a penny for commissioning a composer. So it was a little bit insulting because I was trying to give him a compliment and he didn't want it. I still, I'm very grateful to Sigurd, and I know we all are, for those pieces. But my idea of commissioning is a little bit different. I looked this up in the dictionary, and the dictionary says commissioning is to give an order or to authorize the production of something, as in a work of art. So that's kind of my definition too. I feel like if I commission a work, it could be a piece that I'm not paying money for, although composers deserve to be paid. We all know that. It may be something that I just promise to do performances of, and I've had all kinds of pieces that were written for me that I premiered. some of which I paid a lot of money for, and some which were gifts to me. The other thing that goes along with this is the commissioning. I call them commissions, maybe they aren't, of works already for other instruments that I have talked and worked with composers in making versions for saxophone. A little bit different kind of commission, but if the composer has sanctioned a piece and given permission for it to be a saxophone work, that means a lot to me. So I have several pieces like that, and I know many of you do as well. I feel like as we look back on the history of our instrument, how many years now? 160 years? 100 more. If it was 1840, it'd be, yeah, 100, that's 160 years, right? 180 years, whatever it is. It's not that long in music history terms. But having said that, we've missed a lot of great composers. I think we have screwed up as saxophonists. Composers like Stravinsky or Copland, Messiaen, Penderecki, Schoenberg, even Brahms. We could have had a piece by Brahms. We should have had a piece by Brahms. So I've become very interested in not only working with young composers, but trying to get our best living composers to write for our instrument.
So, out of curiosity, yes, certainly there's a long list of composers that we've missed out on. Are there any? Obviously, there's no one thing you can attribute that to, but especially early on, I think it's just a lack of knowing the saxophone, or a lack of knowing saxophonists, or, I mean, I know there are some stories and anecdotes about.
Right, I'm sure that's a lot of, there weren't as many of us in 1920, 1930, and I suspect there wasn't a classical reputation for the instrument, and so they didn't feel that there was a need or an interest in pursuing a saxophone work.
Sure, in particular, was it Stravinsky? I mean, he actually thought negatively of the instrument, right?
He did, yeah. He didn't like us very much, and with Messiaen, I know Rio Noda, who's a good friend, had worked a little bit with Messiaen and talked to him about writing a piece for saxophone, and Messiaen didn't want to do it. But I think, even if that's the case, we got to court these guys and girls and women more and convince them that we're an important instrument, and we deserve to have good literature.
Yeah. So, regarding the commissioning process, one of the things that tends to be prohibitive for some folks, I mean, even if they know a composer that they really want to commission, is funding. Obviously, composers that are more in demand will typically have a higher cost associated, with a commission. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm always looking for money for composers, and we all are. And we'll talk about this a little bit later today, about ways that we can approach composers and how we might be able to fund their work. I think what is so important for us is to begin by trying to make friends with composers, or at least get to know them a little bit, or marry them.
Right.
Sometimes that works. So you can. I know Tim McAllister married a composer as well, and it can be a very good opportunity for both the composer and the saxophonist. But I think doing some research, taking an opportunity when it presents itself. I know several years ago, Lutoslawski, we knew he was going to be in Cleveland to do some work and pieces with the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. And we made arrangements to have coffee with him. And we also knew that Lutoslawski liked Scotch.
Huh.
So we bought a nice bottle of Scotch and presented that to him, and we had a nice talk. And of course, I asked him about a saxophone piece, And he, of course, said, "Oh, I'd be very interested, but I can't do it right now. I'm very busy." And um, so I did walk away from that meeting with agreement that we could take his dance preludes, which is a cornet work, and perform that on soprano saxophone. And he thought that that would work very well. So it wasn't a wasted experience. I wish he had lived longer, and I wished we could have gotten a great piece from him. But sometimes it doesn't work.
Right. Now, and have you done much performing of the dance preludes?
I've only played it two or three times, and there are a couple places that the octave has to be displaced,
Right.
but it works pretty well.
Okay.
So, making friends, I think, looking for money. I know the John Adams piece that McAllister's been playing cost a lot of money. Um,
Mhm.
do you know how much?
Um, I I don't know off the top of my head. I seem to remember the number of being a $25,000 buy-in per orchestra.
Yeah, and I think there were three orchestras, so that sounds about right. My understanding was around $75,000. None of us can afford that as saxophonists.
Right.
So to find an orchestra or a donor who would help us approach a great composer is a necessity for that. There's, of course, the consortiums. The National Endowment for the Arts had some wonderful consortiums in the 1980s.
Hmm.
I was part of one with Jim Forger and with Ken Radnofsky that commissioned Milton Babbitt, Donald Martino, and Mort Spotnik. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, Also, that same year, 1984, was Don Cinta consortium with Joe Wyko and Laura Hunter, and they were responsible for the Balcom Lilith and the Albright Sonata, and I think was it the Diamond Sonata? Uh, I'm
What
not sure.
maybe what there was also Shugath Mana, right? Was that part of that commissioning?
No, no, I don't think so. There was another one.
Okay.
Um, But that the NEA that's gone away. We don't have that opportunity anymore. Hopefully, after we get through this coronavirus and get a better financial standing, maybe some money will be coming back.
Yeah.
Ken Radnowski has been a great proponent of raising money for composers and his worldwide concurrent premieres. He's not running that anymore. I think maybe his daughter is, but it still exists. And Gunther Schuller was commissioned through that, and John Harbison. So that was another really good opportunity. My saxophone studio has done some consortiums, and I'll mention that a little bit later too. The Ohio Arts Council, New Music America, foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation, Kickstarters. I mean, there are ways of finding money. We just have to be entrepreneurs about it.
Right. So you mentioned earlier in this in that answer about obviously your marriage to Marilyn Shrewd and how much I mean an amazing amount of saxophone music. Music for saxophone and piano, music for saxophone and other other instruments and ensembles. Just a prolific amount of music. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Marilyn's our relationship is being married has been great in many ways, but she has been really a wonderful counselor for me in finding out who the current composers are of the time and who we should be courting and getting to know. So that was very important. But she's written some really terrific pieces. I'm going to play one for you in a moment. But some of her significant works are La Cremosa, that was 2006 for saxophone piano. Renewing the Myth, of course, a competition piece was done at Dinan with 150 saxophones playing it. 1988, Shadows and Dawning, and there's 25 other saxophone works that she has written for us. So I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of her for that contribution. Her Evolution 5 was a piece written in 1976, and she did a version of that. Nate, you may remember. Was that in Corfu?
That was Corfu, yeah.
We were there together, and Marilyn wrote a shortened version of this, which we did a recording session on. And that recording exists someplace. I don't know where. But Evolution 5 was a piece that was composed for myself and for the Chicago Saxophone Quartet. And we premiered it at the World Congress in London that year. I'm just going to play a little excerpt of that right now. Okay, just a little taste of the piece. It was written for a college saxophone professor and a university saxophone quartet, and I think it was a very successful piece. Still is played a lot. I haven't done it recently, but as I listen to it, I'm thinking I'll have to come back to that again. I think it's a pretty good work. I wanted to talk about I'll go back to the consortium of 1984 for a minute, the consortium with Jim Forger and Ken Ranofsky. We were given, I think we received $18,000 from the National Endowment to commission 3 major composers, each of which one of us would have the premier rights for that work. So my piece became the Subotnik. And I'm just going to give you a little background about Morton and his piece. I think I met him in 1984 or 85. He started working on the piece. It was finally premiered in 89 or early 1990. And so it took several years for him to write it. But in the final stages of his work, he decided to use what was called an electric saxophone. And he's saying, well, do I have an electric saxophone? Well, I didn't know what he's talking about. And I don't think anybody did at that point. And he said, well, Yamaha's making this WX7, and I want to put it in a piece, and I want to call this piece In Two Worlds. Half of it's going to be on the wind controller, and half of it's going to be on the traditional old alto saxophone. And thus the two worlds of electronics versus non-electronics. And it was to have electronic accompaniment. It was going to be for orchestra. It was a big project. And I, in those early days of computers, I remember working with Morton, and we would sit in the computer studio, and he would record something from me, and then he'd say, no, I lost it. do it again. And we do this 20 or 30 times, same little thing. And then he would take that music finally, when the computer didn't crash, and transform it into his electronic sounds. He was doing things that was way before its time, being interactive with the saxophone and then with the wind controller. Things that worked sometimes, and sometimes they didn't. So it was a little scary. He also utilized an electronic baton for conducting, for the conductor to use, and the baton kept track of where the beat was, and then supposedly could give electronic cues to the computer. And it usually worked, unless the composer got really flowery and did weird things, which happened. So we kind of got rid of the electronic baton. We did the piece, half of it with the Toledo Symphony, because it wasn't done when the concert rolled around. So we did the alto sax part, and then we did the world premiere with the New Mexico Symphony in 1990. And then there were other versions of this piece. So it became a piece that had many world premieres. It had a world premiere of half of it. It had a world premiere of the whole piece. It had one of a wind controller version. It had one of the alto sax version. And then after about 10 years, all the software and hardware was replaced, which meant that the piece couldn't be played anymore. So for maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 years, it was lost. And then it was revived by one of my doctoral students, and they reworked the sound. So it has another life until our software and hardware change, and then it may be gone forever. I don't know.
Was that Jeff Heisler that was reworking that?
Jeff Heisler did his doctorate on this piece, and worked with our electronic engineer Mark Bunce in redoing that piece.
I remember visiting BG one summer, and he was in the studio at that point working on that. I specifically remember that. So
yeah, no, it was a huge project. So I'm going to play for you a little bit of this piece. I have to cue it up. We'll play about a minute of it. This is the European premiere.
Oh.
Another world premiere in Europe, and this was at the World Saxophone Congress in Pesaro, Italy, in 1992. So let's see if I can get it to work. We'll stop it right there. So I was on a concert with other saxophone concertos, and Paul Brody was playing right before me, and there's a story about that. I'll tell you some other time. But it was a really special moment, and we were just happy that the electronics all worked. We did a concert of the same piece in London shortly before that with the Electric Symphony Orchestra, where they had microphones for every stand of the orchestra. So when you walked on stage, you were walking all over these wires, and there was a light show, which Morton hated. He didn't like having other things going on with his piece, and so I always respect that when I play this, and I don't add extra visuals.
Right. So, um, the now is it? I guess in this final version that Jeff has done,
Mhm.
is it Max now that you're using?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's a version now. You can still do it with orchestra, of course, or you can do it just as a solo with the computer sounds,
Okay.
which is what I often play. But I'd love to hear it with orchestra again. I think
Yeah.
it's a this the movement we were just hearing is called the combat dance, and that was the final movement of the piece.
Interesting. And that's full orchestra with electronics.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So, so that was part of the out of the group commission. You also mentioned that your studio has commissioned several pieces.
Mhm.
So what are some of those, and would you like to highlight any of those?
Yeah, absolutely. In 1999, we worked with Bernard Rands,
Mm.
Pulitzer Prize winner, for a solo piece called Memo 6. Each of my then members of the saxophone studio, many of them, not all, contributed to and were part of that consortium, and thus we were able to give him some money for that performance, for that commission. All of us had the opportunity to do a world premiere on a specific date. And I think there was maybe 35 performances that were presented all over the world, actually. Um, so that was exciting. We're working on a new project right now with composer Aaron Kernis, who's another Pulitzer Prize winner, and that will be targeted for 2021, and that's going to be a piece for saxophone and percussion.
Okay.
Um,
So are these only your current students, or current and past students?
Current and alumni, and for the Kernis, that's going to be with our percussion department as well. So we're recruiting for that at the moment. Probably the most famous, though, of our pieces from the studio was the John Cage commission, is 4 to the 5th power, which I know many of you have either played or have heard. Cage was a guest of our New Music Festival, Bowling Green, in 1986. Wonderful guest, and I could tell you many stories about Cage if we had time. But just a really terrific man, and I'm so glad to have known him. I asked him for a saxophone piece at that time, and he said, "Oh, wow, I'd love to, but I'm writing your opera." And it's spelled Europera, for some orchestra in Europe. He said, and I just can't do it now. And so I said, okay, fine, we'll keep it in mind. And so 1987, I wrote him a letter and asked him again. He said, I'm still writing my opera. I wrote him in 1988 and so forth. Finally, in 1991, he said, okay, I will write you a piece. And I said, okay, could you write a piece that has actual notes written down? Because we know that some of his pieces were graphic and very improvisational. And I said, maybe about 12 minutes. And for 4 saxophones, there could be multiples of 4. And so he said, that's fine. And we agreed on a price for the piece. On New Year's Eve or New Year's Day in 1991, I received this phone call from John Cage, and he didn't say who he was, but we all know his voice, so there's no mistaking that this is John Cage. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Sampen, I just want to check because I'm about done with the piece, and I just have a couple questions. I need to know, what is the range of the saxophone? What is the lowest note, and what is the highest note on the horn?" And I'm thinking, this, you could look at any orchestration book and you find that out. I mean, I'm sure he was putting me on. I'm sure this was kind of a joke,
Right.
because 2 days later I received in the mail a typeset score and parts by C.F. Peters for the piece. So it was already in the works. It was just playing a joke on me, I think. Um, so I said, "All right, Mr. Cage, I'd like to work out the payment for you." And he said, "Well, I'd like to make this a gift for your studio."
Wow.
So it was very, very, very special, and I'm delighted. You know, that at that point we didn't have any pieces by John Cage, so there are a couple that were written right after that, and he died in 1992, so he never heard the piece. But I'm going to play for you just a little bit of this. See if I can get the right place. That's the beginning, and I'm going to just cue it up a little bit. It's very meditative. There are a lot of possibilities of when to play. The rules are that if you play a loud note, it must be short. If you play a soft note, it can be as long as you want. And there are timings for entrances and exits of each. There's only 12 notes for the soprano in the entire piece, and it's 12 minutes long. We'll stop it right there. That's a recording of a CD that I made several years ago with myself playing 8 different voices on that. So 2 alto, 2 tenor, soprano, and Barry. We played this many times. I remember the premiere of this piece in Pesaro. It was in '92. We had 8 players, and we did place them in the different levels of the auditorium in Italy. There was a wonderful theater. It's called the Rossini Theater, and we went for the rehearsal. And the stagehands, we said, well, we need to get up into the box seats, and they said, no, you can't, because that's where the audience sits, and you performers are on stage.
Right.
And we said, well, we know that, but we want to do it differently. And they said, no, you can't do that. So it took us about 45 minutes to finally convince them that we needed to be spread around the whole hall. It was in retrospect, it was funny. At that moment, it was not. We weren't so happy about that.
Right.
But it's a special piece, and I hope you'll all play it more. It's Cage. If you ever go to Europe, most of you have, and you talk to people in Europe about important American composers, Cage will be one of the first names they will mention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so actually, we just did this last summer.
We did. We did an outdoor performance of, how many did we have? 20, maybe 30 saxophones, right?
Had to be at least 25. Yeah.
Yeah. We were outside on the lawn in front of the. a place where we had our meals, very lovely experience with the birds chirping away, and yeah,
Yeah.
it was fun.
Um, so so uh, I specifically I remember the Rands. You had mentioned the Rands earlier. Um, I was in school when that was commissioned, and I remember several students playing that, and I still remember the opening line to that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Even though I was not one of the people premiering that, I heard so many people practicing that, and I heard several performances of it. It's
Right.
stuck with me the whole time.
Yeah,
It's a piece
it's
too.
good piece.
Um, so you also had mentioned friends and colleagues. So obviously you work um, at Bowling Green, and there are several composers, including Marilyn, on faculty there. But you've also developed the. Is it still called the Center for American Music?
Yeah, Mid-American Center for Contemporary Music.
That's right.
Yeah. Um, and it's a very active faculty. When we first came to Bowling Green, we were trying to inspire our school to be interested in new music, and there wasn't much interest. Uh, we were in the middle of a cornfield. We still are, but over the years, we've moved in directions that really have become very striking and very important in the world of new music. And we have a terrific new music festival here, and that's where I met many of these composers that I've been able to make friends with, and then to commission them. But some of the faculty composers, Burton Bierman, who's now retired, wrote a lot of things for saxophone. One of his first pieces he wrote for us was for saxophone and piano. We did in Belgium in 1978, and it was a piece that starts on a high C sharp, altissimo C sharp, pianissimo
Yeah.
is the first note you play,
Right.
and I was instructed to also start singing different pitches at the same time. I'd never sang and played before, and I'm taking this piece on tour and starting on a high C sharp. So it's a big challenge for me, a good one, but an exciting one. When I taught for 3 years at Wichita State University, and on the faculty there was Walter Mays, who remains a really good friend. When we arrived, it was 1974, and the World Saxophone Congress was being presented in Bordeaux, France. And I asked Walter if he would write a piece for us to play, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to." He wanted to write a piece that used almost the same instrumentation as the Ibert concertino. And his idea was that this would be done back to back with Ibert, so you wouldn't need too many extra players. So he wrote this piece, and we proposed it to Jean-Marie Landex, and Landex wrote back, and he said, it's impossible. It's impossible that we could play this because we cannot hire an orchestra. We have no money to hire an orchestra, so impossible. I'm sorry." Very, very pointed and very direct, and no question about it. So we asked some friends in Kansas there if they might be willing to help sponsor this. And we found a corporation or a company that said, yes, we'll give you some money for this. I can't remember how much, but they gave us enough money to hire the Bordeaux Chamber Orchestra to be the performers. And so I wrote back to Landex and I said, "Okay, we have money to hire the orchestra." And then he goes like, I'm bothering him again. He was not happy, but he agreed to have this done. And since then, we've become very good friends. Jean-Marie is a wonderful, wonderful man, and I love spending time with him. There's a lot of stories about that premiere, but it's the piece has become really, I think, in my opinion, one of my favorites. It I think it stood the test of time. It was in the 70s, an era where a lot of avant-garde composers in America were turning to Lutoslawski and Penderecki for inspiration, and the Maze has a lot of highlights from those composers. He also had done some, this is Walter Mays, had done some research. He wanted a mute for the saxophone. He wanted to mute the instrument, and he had read about Berlioz and the fact that Berlioz had muted a clarinet by covering, enclosing the instrument, covering it totally, so that there was, it was like in a bag of some sort.
Wow.
And so we worked together to figure out the best material. We tried leather, we tried different pelts from animals, and it turned out a lamb's wool was the best, with the fleece turned inside. And so this mute encased the whole instrument. It looked a little bit ridiculous, but it was a unique sound. And so that's used in the second movement of the piece. When I play the piece now, I don't use the mute because I think it's so visually outrageous that it detracts from the wonderful piece that he's created.
Do you still have the mute?
Well, the composer Walter Mays had there, and there's only one. There were never multiple ones made.
Of the part.
It's great. Okay, so I'm going to play the beginning of this Walter Mays concerto. This is with a faculty group from Wichita State University. I will stop right there. It's a wonderful piece. There was never a piano reduction until fairly recently. One of my students created that, and just I think 2 years ago, Drew Hossler, one of our undergraduates at Bowling Green, memorized this piece and tried out for the concerto competition and won on that. So it is a winning piece, and it's I mean, it's what, 45 years old now, but it's really stood the test of time very well.
So you said, is it exactly the same ensemble as Eber? So the 11 other.
It's a little bit different. There's an organ, electronic organ in the piece, and I can't remember what else is different, but it's very similar. Most of the instrumentation is the same. Yeah. Good. Okay.
So, one of the other major projects that you've had has been your postcards, and I've seen you perform many of those, and I've performed a few of those myself, and I guess this kind of draws, friends and colleagues, but also people that you've gotten to know through different ways. Can you talk about your postcard series at all, and the pieces involved and composers and all that?
Absolutely. it was in the 1990s that Marilyn and I were traveling in Europe, and we had various conversations with some of our European colleagues who would make negative comments oftentimes about composers from the USA, saying that it's so unfortunate that America has no unified compositional style, comments like that. So in response to that, Marilyn and I argued the opposite point of view, that isn't it great? Aren't we blessed with all these multitude of compositional styles? And perhaps we should celebrate that. So that was our whole idea behind this. These postcards. They're short pieces. If we were doing it today, we call them emails, or I don't know, something more up to date. But we wanted to highlight this diversity, so we asked many prominent composer friends around the country if they would be interested in contributing to this project. We have now, I think there's 16 postcards in the series, including pieces by Milton Babbitt, Pauline Oliveros, Sam Adler, John Adams, Steve Stuckey, Karel Husa, and many others. So it's kind of a special project. It's an ongoing one, and we're hoping to have 5 more in the future. We're working on that. So we'll see what happens. I wanted to play you one of these postcards. This is the Milton Babbitt piece, which of all the postcards, it's the hardest. Milton was such a gentleman, such a nice man. I know many of us have read his "Who Cares If You Listen" article and his sarcasm about audiences, but he really was a very, very nice man. And he would always call me my boy. Hello, how are you, my boy? I was always his boy in this relationship, but he was special. And he wrote this this little piece. It's a 2-minute piece. I'm going to play the whole thing for you right now. Seems so simple,
Right.
but his rhythms are extraordinarily difficult. I played many times Babbitt's Images. Have you played that, Nate?
And I did World Series.
Ah, okay. Congratulations to you. That is a killer.
It's a monster. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And I actually, unfortunately, I never had any interaction with him. Um, right when I was recording that, I believe he passed away that same year, so I never had a chance to send it to him. But what a an amazing thinker and composer, and what also his music has a sense of humor, even when it's as serialized
Right.
as. I mean, I think even listening just now, I mean, it's there, it's in it, and just of course the title World Series, WHIRLED, in and of itself is humorous, right?
He loved baseball, and so he knew what he was doing when he used that title. Um, Image is a piece for sopranino and soprano and alto, and there's about 80 pages in score, and you have to see the score in order to do it. We didn't have iPads when I was playing it. It would be much easier in that sense today. But but the rhythms are just incredible. I'm sure like World Series, I spent months just listening in the images to the recording,
Mm-hmm.
the electronic sounds, just to try to keep my place in the piece. So uh, big challenge. I have a photo of Babbitt in my office. He when he was 10 or 12, he played saxophone.
Oh,
I don't know if you knew that. And I have a signed picture of him holding that saxophone.
oh, that's incredible.
It's kind of fun. So that's our postcard series, which we hope to continue for a while. It's been a lot of fun,
So you
and
said five more pieces?
yeah, this potentially will be for the Japan World Saxophone Congress. I hope it will happen. Uh, and we've been talking with Augusta Reed Thomas and Bill Balcom and Bernard Rance, Shulamit Ron, and there's one more, Jennifer Higdon. So we'll see if they will all come through for us. But that'll be a nice addition, I think, to
No
the.
doubt. So one of the other major contributions that you know uh, that we have that was for an instrument that's other than saxophone that you've been involved with is wings. Um, and just can you talk about either that and just your thoughts on um, soliciting settings by the composer for other instruments?
Sure. I can just mention a couple other ones, and then we'll talk more about wings. Um, when we were in Germany, must have been in the 80s, late 80s, we went to Cologne, and by chance there was a concert of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen in a little church, and so we went to the concert, and one of his friends, close friends, was Susie Stevens, who was a classmate of mine, clarinetist from Northwestern, and she worked with Stockhausen and still handles a lot of his business affairs. So she introduced us to Karl-Heinz, and we talked, had a nice conversation. And he didn't have a saxophone piece at that time, but he thought in friendship would be a perfect possibility. And so we corresponded back and forth a little bit, and he did make a few changes for our instrument. And then gave us his blessing as a saxophone work, which I think is terrific to have. Of course, he has his Knaben duet as well for two sopranos, which came a little bit later. But I think that was a good addition. Georgi Kurtag, who was a colleague and friend of Ligeti, and Kurtag, although when I was in school, didn't know his name. He's really a major composer. When we were in Bordeaux a few years ago, Jean-Marie Landex set up a meeting for us, and we got together and talked about doing some saxophone versions, and those are now in the publication stage. So we hope they'll be available soon. The Joan Tower piece, Joan and I had negotiated and talked for years about a piece, and then she decided maybe this clarinet work of hers would be a good temporary substitute. Since this, I think she's written a couple original pieces for us, but this was her first piece that was sanctioned for saxophone. And I played it many times. I'm going to play just a little bit of this for you. Several years ago, my class, saxophone class, we were wanting to celebrate Earth Day in April. And we decided to do a concert on birds. So we did Firebird, and we did Rio Noda's Les Oiseaux, and we did a couple other bird pieces. And I wanted to do Joan Tower's piece, which of course is about birds. You may not know that she originally was thinking of a panther when she wrote this, totally different animal. And as she progressed through the work, she decided it seemed more, I guess, more bird-like. I don't know. So she called it Wings, and I played it many times. But I wanted to do, I always thought about this. Birds have two wings, and wouldn't it be nice to have two saxophones doing this? So I did a version with one of my students, and I sent that recording to Joan and said, "What do you think? And can I have your permission to do this?" And she said, "Oh, I think it's great. I like my solo version better,
Yeah.
but I think it sounds pretty good." So this is the duo version, and I'm going to play about a minute's worth of this for you. Okay, just to give you a sampling of it.
So we're all very familiar with that work. Again, as that obviously was part of the NASA competition.
You heard it many times, yeah.
Many times.
I know, yeah. That's a great piece, though. Really wonderful piece. Okay, well, I think we could go to some questions if we have any, or any other topics that you want to continue with.
Sure. So, like, if anybody has questions, please type them in the chat. Did you want to talk about any kind of what you're hoping for in the future? Any directions you see us going in, or you hope we go in, or wishes that you have for us to move in?
Yeah, I have two or three composers, not that I'm working with right now, but that I would love to have pieces by. And maybe you can add some to this list, Nate. Gubaidulina is a wonderful, wonderful a woman composer who is, I don't know, is she in her 80s now? She's
Yep.
getting up there. And Sarieho, another terrific woman composer who, um, if a saxophonist hasn't talked to her yet, then we need to do that. I've tried to set up some meetings. I haven't been able to up to this point. Both terrific women. Arvo Pärt, another composer that we should have a piece by. Who else can you think of that we can add to?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, a younger composer that is very much on the radar right now, I think, is Thomas Addis, a
Yeah,
British composer,
absolutely.
has really been huge in the especially in the opera world. Um, um, I mean, there are so many, you know, so many great composers out there right now. Um, Certainly, um, Caroline Shaw, I think, would have some really interesting things to write with the saxophone. She
Mhm.
also does a lot of vocal writing and some really interesting chamber music. I know she's written for her own group, Room Full of Teeth, that she's in. Also, So Percussion. She's done some interesting collaborative works with them. I think
Right.
certainly she would have some really great ideas about that. I know I would like to have a solo work by Martin Bresnik. Um, you
Mhm.
know, I know led you know, a commission on another quartet that's part of their I think it's part of their Wall series that they're doing, Mending Wall. Um, and so that's coming out there. But I would like to have either one for saxophone and percussion, or saxophone and piano, or solo saxophone, something like that. But oh, we have a question here from Kirby. How did the BGSU Studio Commission come about? Just by your personal connections with composers, or was support given or permission needed for it to happen?
Um, we yeah well, started with personal connections, and again, these oftentimes are composers that have visited our school, or by chance I meet them at a conference, um, and we started discussion. I then solicit my class to see if they're interested. Usually the buy-in is not very much money, maybe $100, $150 for being part of a consortium like this, and it's really good for students because they can sometimes not. It's not that students have money, but 150 isn't a lot, and you can be part of our future,
Mhm.
and perhaps part of a piece that will be around for a long time. So it's a great opportunity, and it also, if you when you do your premiere performance, you can make a big deal out of it. You can get some press coverage. You can add other pieces to a recital, but make that kind of your centerpiece. So it's it's a great project, and it kind of pulls the studio together in a good way
Right.
also.
Yeah.
We did have to go through the university to collect the funds, and I had to get some permission, but that's not a big deal.
Right. Right. Um, what what was the first studio commission that you did?
Bernard Rounds.
That was
That was our first one. Yeah, we've only done three big ones, big name ones, and it's a lot of work. No matter how much everybody says they want to be a part of it, when it comes down to remembering to pay the money and be signing up, you tend to lose a few people.
sure. Um, and so uh, was your work with Oliveros part? Did she come through as a guest at the composers conference?
She
Contemporary.
she did. She did. She was. I think it was in the '80s, and fascinating woman. Um, she did a. I remember her in our big concert hall doing a strolling. What was she was playing something, some instrument. I can't remember now, but she's walking around and doing an improvisation. Really interesting person. And she wrote her little postcard for us, for Marilyn and me. It was called Miro Rim,
Mm.
Mirr. What would it be? Mirorim, which is a palindrome, so you can turn it around.
Right.
She liked little puzzles like that. And the piece is came to us on a postcard,
Oh,
and she put up a little note at the top, said, "Okay, start on I don't know, let's say B flat. Uh, if he goes up, she goes down. If she goes up, he goes down. Continue, play. If you get mixed up, that's part of the piece. When you get to a unison B flat at the end, you're done." So it's kind of a verbal piece.
sure.
Uh,
So, I mean, there's a lot of room for varying length of that, depending on when you finally land on the B flat together.
that's right. That's right. You can make it 13 minutes long or 3 minutes or 30 seconds, I guess.
Yeah. And so, you had part of the postcards series also is the Albright, right?
Yeah, the what's it called? The postcard from Kansas or something like that. I think um, something from Kansas. Anyway, uh, I guess Bill Albright, we knew him very well. Postcards from Kansas. Thank you. Welcome to Interstate 75. That's from Drew Hassler. Thank you, Drew. Um, Drew's a Bowling Green graduate going to Michigan next year.
Hmm.
Um, so Albright was in Kansas, and he was on Route 75, which he talked about as being the most boring road in the country. And he has kinds of fun things like a roadkill and quarter note equals 144, no speeding allowed, or something like that. Um, and those were all sent on postcards as well. Do you have a copy of that?
I maybe.
That's published now. You can buy, I think, again, C.F. Peters, and there's maybe 10 postcards, and you can put them in any order for the performance.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so that's um, that what a I think that's such an interesting idea. I didn't know the origin behind it actually being you were that was as a result of actually somebody voicing concern over a lack of unified voice.
Yeah.
And so that's a really interesting and such a long celebration of it. So how long has that been going on? What was the first postcard versus up to today?
I think 1997 we started that. Yeah.
That's really cool. It's
Yeah.
an evolving project.
Yeah. Yeah, we've
Well,
had fun.
you know, um, I really appreciate all of the your thoughts on this and such a wealth of knowledge about this process and thank you for all of your contributions to our repertoire. And um, I'm really honored to have you to be able to talk to you this afternoon. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Nate. It's my pleasure. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Take care.
Bye bye.
Yeah.